What's up? This is Miss Doyle. We will be discussing World War II today. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on American involvement in the rise of dictators. So, our objective today is I can describe American involvement in World War II and I can inform the American public about one dictator during World War II. So, there are two tasks for today and tomorrow. One, today you need to complete the guided note taking sheet, and two, tomorrow you will be creating a dictator poster, which we'll discuss later in the video. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to pop over to your Google Classroom and you're going to pull up your World War II guided note-taking sheet. It's not a lot. I just want you to fill in the blanks, but mainly I want you to listen to what I'm saying because this is the information that you need to know to set you up for success with regards to World War II. So you're going to fill out that guided note-taking sheet. You're going to get that information from me talking as well as going through the notes. So pause the video if you need to pause the video or speed it up if I'm talking too slow. So here's our compelling question for this unit. Did America really want to become a world power? Because right after World War II, America is going to leave its isolationist policies of wanting to stay to itself, and now it's going to totally embrace being involved in every country's affairs almost. So here is part one. What are the causes of World War II? So remember, everything that happened at the end of World War I kind of set the stage for where we're going to be at with World War II. So here are the long-term causes. One is the Treaty of Versailles. Two is the economic depression, the Great Depression, which we learned about in Part A, the rise of dictators and fascisms, the failure of the League of Nations, and a big one is the policy of appeasement, which we'll talk about. The short term cause, meaning the last thing that ultimately led to World War II, will be the invasion of Poland, and we're going to discuss all these in detail starting right now. So let's talk about the Treaty of Versailles. It is the treaty signed at the end of World War I to stop World War I and figure out how we never make this happen again. But the thing is, remember, Germany was the first world power to declare war on another world power, Russia. So when Germany bowed out, it's going to end up taking sole blame of the war. Okay, so that's going to come with the war guilt clause. So because they have to take sole blame of the war because of the first world power to declare war on another world power, they're going to have to pay some money. They're going to have to pay people back because it cost a lot of money to go to war. So in the Treaty of Versailles, not only was there a war guilt clause, there was a war reparations clause. So, yeah, it makes sense. The losing country has to pay for all the damages. But in the Treaty of Versailles, it totally dismantled the German economy. One, it took land away from Germany. Okay, and when you have land, aka colonies, you have resources. If you have resources, you have money. Because if you sell those resources, that's how you can pay for things such as building up your military or even paying off a war debt. So when it took away the colonies, when it took away its land, when France came in and took the Ruhr Valley, it took away Germany's possibility to make any money. So when they couldn't make any money, okay, it led to the German economy completely dismantling, and they're going to go through an economic depression, which we'll talk on the next slide. But at the Treaty of Versailles, there's only the big five showed up to discuss how they were going to handle the war in Germany. And those big five are France, America, Italy, Japan, and Russia. Notice who's not involved: Germany. So shouldn't Germany be there to discuss the end of the world, the end of the war agreement? They should, but they weren't invited. So they were forced to accept all conditions. So this treaty ultimately sets the stage to the rise of a dictator to promise to end this economic oppression, promising to end the Treaty of Versailles and to get revenge on everything that's been put on them. So when you look at political cartoons, okay, and this is one of the ones about the Treaty of Versailles, and you will see this in the future. Hint, hint. Notice how you have the big four pills. Okay, well, it's the big five, but in this picture, it's just going to say the big four. Okay, notice how it says the British Empire here. These are going to represent the other ones that attended. So like America, Japan, etc. So they are holding the spoon to the peace terms. So that's the Treaty of Versailles, and they're force feeding that to the German. Now notice how the British Empire, France, America, Italy, and Japan all have their arms wrapped around it. So when you're looking at political cartoons, you've got to understand what the meaning is. And in order to do that, you have to have the background knowledge, which I'm going over today. Okay, so this is the German Kaiser. This is the British Empire. So everything that I just went over, we're going to keep going. So now let's talk about economic depression. What is going on in Germany? Because we've already talked about what's going on in America with the Great Depression. The whole world was hit by this in the 1920s. And what it is in a depression, economies shrink, trade is reduced, businesses close, prices fall, banks fail, and unemployment rises. So we have a dollar McChicken right now. Okay, imagine what happens when you have inflation. Instead of paying for a dollar McChicken, you're paying $5 for a McChicken. And then maybe even $10 for a McChicken. We would say that's crazy. I'm not paying $10 for a McChicken. But if the value of the dollar, okay, diminishes, that's what's going to happen. And what Germany was doing was, in an effort to try to pay for these bills, they just kept printing money. And when you print money, the value of the dollar goes down, which is why that price of the McChicken is going to go up to $10 or even $20. So it's all about how the economy is working around. So sometimes during a depression, you're unemployed. When you're unemployed, you may lose your home, and when you lose your home, you're on the streets. And if you're on the streets and you don't have a job, can you really afford to feed yourself? No. So you will literally turn to anyone that's going to alleviate those problems. So just like it says in bullet number 3, sometimes during a depression, people look for a strong political leader to resolve their problems. And in 1933, Adolf Hitler became that leader who actually helped resolve these problems. He promised to restore German wealth and power. So let's talk about the rise of dictators, because there are 4 you need to know. So rather than creating democracies, okay, the Treaty of Versailles weakened countries and leads to this dictatorship. And the 4 people you need to know is Joseph Stalin, Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, and Hideki Tojo. So there are key terms that you need to know. So a dictator is a leader of a nation that exercises control by suppressing its opposition through terror and censorship and through nationalism. So censorship is meaning you don't get access to all the information. Okay, so there is no freedom of press where everybody can expose every little thing about anything. Okay, there is censorship, meaning you are only told so much of the truth. That way you are motivated to support this idea. Okay, so in militarism, so this was Japan. Okay, it's glorifying the military. The nation is led by a military leader, and it's preparing the military is the most important thing that they're going to do in a militaristic country. Then there's totalitarianism. Okay, a government that maintains a complete control over its citizens, individuals. Individuals have no rights, and the government suppresses all opposition. So if you are not for them and you're against them, you'll probably be in jail or killed. So now let's talk about fascism. Nationalism is stressed, and the interests of the state are above those of the individual. So my rights aren't as important as the group rights. So they're focusing on the needs of the whole, the needs of the many, rather than the needs of one. So it's centralized under an oppressor, which Benito Mussolini is a good example. And often the leader disrespects human rights, controls the media, is obsessed about the nation's security, and is nationalistic and militaristic. So here's the 4, and here's the big topics that you need to know. And you can come back to this part of the video to help you try to figure out what you need to talk about when you choose your dictator poster. So you have Adolf Hitler, okay? Country is Germany. His political party is the Nazi Party. He is anti-Semitism. He wrote Mein Kampf. He is all about building up Germany's militarism, and eventually he's going to take those Jews and try to conduct a mass genocide by doing concentration camps, putting all the Jews in camps, and eventually trying to exterminate them with death camps. Again, you're going to learn all this information when you go to research and create your dictator poster or slide deck. Joseph Stalin, here are the major topics you need to know. His country is known as Russia, but you got to understand, Russia at this time completely changed their name to the USSR. They are a communist party. He wants to eliminate rivals. He has this 5-year plan to try to make Russia an industrialized nation rather than focusing on agriculture. He believes in collective farming. So we're going to have as many people living on that farm, and we're all going to share the resources. Okay, then there's a great purge to get rid of any Western ideals, such as anything like Americans' beliefs, such as democracies. You have Mussolini, who kind of got all this thing started and inspired Adolf Hitler. His country is Italy, and he believes in that fascist party. He wants glorification of the military. He wants extreme nationalism. Oop, my bad. Extreme nationalism. He creates his police group known as the Black Shirts, and his idea of is fascism is how he's going to control the state. Again, and last but not least is Hideki Tojo. His country is Japan. He is a military leader embracing militarism, and the emperor was a figurehead. Okay. He has a code of Bushido. You need to understand the rape of Nanking, the kamikaze pilots, and ultimately Pearl Harbor, which we will talk about later. So these are the major topics you need to focus on. The reason why I'm not going over them right now is because you guys are going to dive into these major topics when you go talk about your dictator posters, which we'll go over at the end of the video. So this is a video to help you better understand what's going on with these political ideologies. But ultimately, in each one of these four, they have shared characteristics. So you have propaganda, which is a biased interpretation of something. You may see posters to try to persuade you to believe in a certain thing. Or maybe on the radio, you only hear bad things about what's coming from America, so it makes you want to hate America. Then there's nationalism. You have pride in your country. Think about how we get up and we say the Pledge of Allegiance every day. That is showing that we are nationalistic. Okay. Then there's very violent. If you go against what I want you to do, okay, there are going to be repercussions. You may be beat, you may be jailed, or worse, you may be hung. Some people even got kicked out of the country. You don't have access to multiple political parties. You only have one option, one party with one candidate running. There is a secret police, meaning there are people who will rat you out if you're talking bad about that party or anything like that. There is control of the media. You're only exposed to the information the government wants you exposed to. They don't want you to know everything. Think about Hitler. Think about him rounding up all the Jews. A lot of the Germans had no idea that they were getting sent to concentration camps and they were being exterminated with death camps. Okay, we've already talked about imprison or execute anybody that spoke against them. You can use this chart. You can pause the video to look at how each ideology impacted people. So now let's focus on how the rise of dictators actually happened. At the end of World War I, the U.S. president said, hey, let's have a League of Nations where a bunch of countries come together and we make sure that this never happens again. That one country doesn't try to imperialize on other countries and they start a whole war where it gets everybody involved. Well, the biggest weakness is that the United States never joined because Congress did not approve it. So ultimately, the League of Nations had no backbone because there was nobody there to back something up. So the League of Nations was an international organization to set up in 1919 to keep world peace. It was intended that all countries would be members and that if there were disputes between countries, they could be settled by negotiation rather than force. Well, obviously, this doesn't happen because we have another world war. So since the League of Nations had no army to prevent military aggression, okay, Italy and Hitler and Japan are going to see how far they can push the League of Nations. So Italy is going to invade Ethiopia in Africa. Japan's going to invade Manchuria in China. Okay, Mussolini and Hitler are going to help the Spanish leader try to overthrow with a communist revolt. So all of these things are going to happen and ultimately push and push and push the League of Nations, which follow into that policy of appeasement, which is allowing you to do what you want to prevent a war. So in the Spanish Civil War, the one I just mentioned, okay, in 1936, the Civil War breaks out between Spain and between the Republican/Communist coalition and fascists. So the fascist leader is Francisco Franco, who rebelled against the Spanish Republic, starting a civil war. So Franco is trying to become the new leader. He's trying to implement communism. And Mussolini and Hitler are like, dude, I like this idea. Let's see if the League of Nations is going to step in. Let's push them. Let's push them to that brink where they have to actually come in and do something. And if they don't do anything, that means we can steamroll over them because they're never going to do anything. So that's that policy of appeasement. They don't have a backbone to try to prevent this from happening. So Hitler and Mussolini give them support. Ultimately, Franco is successful. The League of Nations do nothing. So Hitler and Mussolini says it's on. We're still going to keep conquering, okay, territories around us. We're going to try to get Lebensraum, German living space, meaning we're going to try to get the surrounding countries and all German-speaking countries to help us out. So talking about that appeasement, and appeasement means to agree to the demands of another nation in order to avoid conflict. Britain and France began to believe that the treaty was unfair to Germany, allowing Hitler to build Germany's military back up and quit paying war reparations. So what happens is Hitler meets with Britain and they meet with France in this at, at Munich. And in this Munich agreement, Britain and France allow Germany to annex areas in Czechoslovakia where German speakers lived. But they specifically said Hitler could not invade the rest of Czechoslovakia or any other country. Well, in March of 1939, Germany broke its promise. Remember, Francisco Franco over here, we know the League of Nations isn't going to do nothing. So he invades the rest of Czechoslovakia because he continues to want to build up Germany to come back. So now that he's used and abused that Munich agreement, he is going to invade Poland as a result of the policy of appeasement. Hitler continued to abuse his power, violating the treaty, growing his armies, taking over territories. So on September 1st, 1939, German and Russian troops invade Poland. Britain and France immediately declare war on Germany for violating the Treaty of Versailles and the Munich Agreement. But what makes it so successful with this invasion of Poland, because, think about it, Russia wants Poland too. He signs a non-aggression pact promising not to ever attack Russia. So they split Poland in half. But the reason why Hitler was so successful is because he used this thing called blitzkrieg, which is a lightning war method designed to strike swift, focusing on blowing the enemy using mobile, maneuverable forces, including armored tanks and air support. So this ideal attack leads to quick victory, limiting the loss of soldiers and artillery. So the invasion of Poland ultimately starts World War II, and that's what you need to know. So I just talked about the non-aggression pact. And so what you need to understand, this is a huge thing. And if you look at this picture right here, this is a propaganda piece. It's a political cartoon trying to figure out, even though Hitler agreed not to attack Russia, how long will this actually last? So the purpose of signing this pact, Russia / the Soviet Union hoped the rest of the world would destroy itself, and Russia would be there to pick up the pieces, and Russia would be able to spread communism. So you do need to understand that the non-aggression pact is going to be a huge deal. So let's focus on America. America is isolationist. They don't want to get involved whatsoever. Isolationism is the effort to remain isolationist and not get involved. They want to focus on their problems. Think about it. We're going through the Great Depression as well. We have the New Deal going on right now. We want to focus on helping Americans, not getting involved in a war across the whole ocean. So in an effort to remain isolationist but also help, we're going to pass a series of neutrality acts. So the one in 1935 made it illegal to sell arms to countries at war. Okay, that's totally isolationist. Agreed. However, in 1937, continues the illegality of selling goods to nations at war, but implements a cash and carry policy for all non-war items sold. So, for example, if it's not guns, if it's not tanks, or it's not boats, okay, we're going to let countries at war buy it as long as they're paying cash and give it to us. That's somewhat isolationist. However, in 1939, the actual cash and carry policy is passed by Congress, okay, changing the Neutrality Act to allow warring nations to buy U.S.-made weapons as long as they paid cash and transported them on their own ships. So this was mainly aimed to help Great Britain. This is not being isolationist. This is clearly choosing a side. We're going to help Britain, okay, and we're going to give them guns. That's clearly getting involved in a war. But Franklin Roosevelt believed in internationalism. He believed in trade between nations creates prosperity and peace, but realized too many Americans want neutrality. So how do you take a whole country and how do you make them want to go to war? It's all about what you're exposed to. What are you seeing? It's all about that propaganda, which we'll focus on later on in this unit. So what happens at the beginning? is the Axis powers and the Allied powers are going to form. That's an alliance. So the Axis powers includes Germany, Italy, and Japan. The Allied powers are Great Britain, France, and later the Soviet Union when Hitler attacks them, and the United States when they ultimately get pulled in after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, so that is the end of part one notes. Okay, you will be choosing one dictator to focus on and create a poster. That information and those directions will be posted on Google Classroom today or tomorrow. I hope you guys enjoyed learning about World War II. You guys have a fantastic day.